Okay, so what criteria go into building a special language corpus intended to build also a subject matter specific monolingual terminology list? Well, for a special language corpus, your starting point is going to be 100,000 words, building a corpus that contains 100,000 words. Any corpora should be designed to fulfill research objectives. As I previously stated, lexicographers, or those who write dictionaries, may use a general language corpus to identify all meanings of a single word. Language teachers may use that same corpus to identify the best vocabulary to teach. To meet a design objective of reuse, general language corpora are populated with billions or millions or billions of words, and then content, once compiled, can be manipulated according to the specific research objectives of the person who is using the corpus. The broad objective of a general language corpus is building an unbiased representative sample of a universe of texts. And this is achieved by populating the corpus with as many texts from as many different authors and genres as possible. The broad objective of unbiased representation also holds true for specialized language corpora, though content is populated into these corpora into a much more selective way. According to Khurshid Ahmad and Margaret Rogers in Corpus Linguistics and Terminology Extraction, the size of a corpus is a major indication of a lack of bias. Still, in specialized domains, corpora of 100,000 words are a good starting point, according to the authors, who justify the smaller size compared to a general language corpus in a number of ways. First, text within specialized fields contain much less variation, and the texts themselves are very lexically dense. They say a lot with fewer words. They contain greater ratios of content words from which terms can be drawn, and the terms that are extracted are, in theory, much more consistent than extraction results from general language corpora. Next, special language content is produced by subject matter experts, whose expertise lends credibility and authority to the text of a corpus. Finally, terminologists, unlike lexicographers, are not concerned with all language. They are concerned with special language. The domain-specific terms that are the focus of the terminologist's work are in rich production in the dense, specialized content of the field. Plus, while building a corpus of 100,000 words sounds intimidating, it actually doesn't take too long to compile that amount of documents for those with a solid awareness of the specialized field and the recognized publications by organizations in that field. In terms of criteria for inclusion of an information product in a special language corpora, a number of characteristics can be taken into consideration. You'll take into consideration the text type, the domain and subdomain, the author and the publisher. For instance, if I were building a corpus on terminology and terminography, I would include authors like Dr. Sue Ellen Wright and Dr. Barbara Karsh. The language, including regional variety. English is an official language of nearly 60 countries in the world, excluding the United States, though in many of these countries, English is not the most widely used language. So this English being an official language is not necessarily a sign that a text that comes from a specific region meets the criteria of being written by somebody who speaks the language as a mother language. The publisher is also important. As I state in the article, Getting Started with Terminology Management, if Microsoft Documents are the only documents included in a corpus intended to produce terminology related to information technology, the term extraction results will be biased toward Microsoft jargon, rather than producing the shared special language used by IT professionals, no matter their company affiliation. Note too that generally blogs should not be included, particularly if those blogs are associated with a company that sells a product or service, since the blog constitutes marketing and not subject matter experts writing for other subject matter experts. The publisher will also be an important characteristic that you'll want to look at when selecting a document for a corpus. Academic journals and chapters tend to have double-blind review processes, and so this means that perhaps a chapter written by a person who's writing not in their mother language will have better use of the mother language of the corpus by virtue of the article being or chapter being edited by individuals who do speak the language as a mother language. So this is where broader representation can be achieved in a corpus. Otherwise, when looking at trade journals, when looking at other types of publications, if there's a lot of typos in the publication, that's a sign that the publication hasn't been reviewed, that it hasn't been written very carefully, and so you might not want to include that publication in your corpus, or you might want to give that publication a lower reliability rating in your corpus. For publication dates, older texts will likely contain obsolete terms. Newer texts may contain neologisms and terms that are undergoing meaning shifts that haven't quite been established yet. And so even newer texts where the terminology is still undergoing a period of evening out, those terms might not yet be good candidates to include in a terminology list. And so the corpus items may be given sort of a lower reliability rating too. As I previously stated, that you'll also want to look at the audience of the text. The text should be written for subject matter experts. And you'll want to look for texts that are written in an original language. You'll want to avoid the inclusion of translations in monolingual subject matter specific corpora. So why not include translations? Well, in The Challenges That Lie Ahead by Mona Baker, Baker decries the fact that in 1997, the field of linguistics had only just begun to consider corpora as a means to study the phenomenon of translation as a variety of language behavior that merits attention in its own right. To Baker, rather than being used as a basis for criticism, corpus studies could be used to understand what actually happens in the process of translation. The goal Baker identifies for corpus-based translation studies is lofty. She looks not to find patterns in the translation of specific language pairs, but to identify universal features of translation. These features would be the result of the purpose and context of language use for the special purpose of translation. In translation, the characteristics of language use are influenced by very different constraints than the constraints of the production of an original language text. Translations are, after all, based on a fully articulated source text rather than resulting from original thought. And if I were feeling philosophical here, I would begin a discussion on whether a truly original thought ever can exist, since everything pretty much is derivative. But translations must also look both ways, or consider both the source and target cultures. And translations must always respond to their status as translations. So surely these unique constraints produce patterns unique to translation. And Baker's chapter indeed shows that this is true. Her chapter is beautiful advocacy for the study of translation as an art per se, and I wholeheartedly concur with the spirit with which she approaches corpus studies in translation. Yet her analysis serves a different purpose to our discussion on the formation of special language corpora destined for use in terminology extraction. Patterns that she postulates occur across translations, no matter the language, are precisely the reason that translations should not be included in corpora geared toward terminology database creation. Take, for instance, the tendency toward simplification in translation. Translators, perhaps subconsciously, employ a wide variety of strategies to simplify texts and make them easier to read. Among the strategies, Baker notes the tendency to break long sentences into multiple smaller sentences. Translations also prioritize a single interpretation where ambiguity exists in a source text. This move to increase the explicitness is demonstrated by the decreasing lexical density of a text. A text's lexical density increases the proportion of the total percentage of content words it employs. Special language texts tend to be very lexically dense. Translations tend to use more functional language than the source texts on which they are based. The leveling out of meaning is another example cited and indeed coined by Baker. Baker defines leveling out as the tendency of translated text to gravitate towards the center of a continuum. Perhaps this phenomenon is the result of the need of a translation to respond to its status as such. Translators may feel less apt to receive the criticisms of literal and mistranslation that result from exploring source language constraints or source language constructs or creatively interpreting the source language. This may lead or have led to the choice to stick to the safe middle ground rather than take on the risks associated with exploring either the source or language extremes of a continuum. Interestingly, corpus-based translation studies move in the opposite direction of traditional corpus linguistics per Baker, where traditional models focus on pinpointing terms based on frequency and mapping meaning based on close analysis of large data sets. Translation-based models seek not to study specific instances of language, but global overarching patterns in translation. Communication and goals are shaped by different influences in original language and translation language, textual production, and corpora analyses. When building corpora, our design too should be shaped by the reality of communication and our goals. So again, don't include translations in your special language corpora. The four universals of translation per Baker are as follows. Explicitation, an overall tendency to spell things out rather than leave them implicit. Simplification, the tendency to simplify the language used in translation. Normalization or conservatism, a tendency to exaggerate features of the target language and to conform to its typical patterns. And leveling out, the tendency of translated text to gravitate towards the center of a continuum.